ESPN's Mel Kiper released draft grades for all 32 NFL teams after the 2026 NFL draft, and he gave the Jacksonville Jaguars a C grade. Tied for lowest with the San Francisco 49ers and Minnesota Vikings, fun fact. But we're actually going to be discussing why I think I agree with some of Mel's points, why I disagree with some of Mel's points, and just kind of give an overall reaction on this episode of Jags Now presented by Prize Picks. Let's get into the Jaguars 2026 draft class, shall we? Because the Jaguars draft class was very anti-consensus, I think is the proper way to say that. They went with Nate Borkacher, the tight end out of Texas A&M in the second round before a lot of tight ends went during the 2026 NFL draft. They then followed it up with Albert Regis, a fellow Texas A&M Aggie in the third, defensive tackle to kind of inject some youth. Emmanuel Pregnon was still there at pick 88, the offensive guard out of Oregon, followed by Jalen Husky, the defensive back out of Maryland. Wesley Williams, the edge out of Duke in the fourth round of pick 119 overall. Tanner Koziel, the tight end out of Houston, I think he's going to be a really nice fit in this Jaguars offense. Josh Cameron, the kind of do-it-all weapon out of Baylor. I think Liam Cohen's going to get really creative with him in his role. C.J. Williams, the wide receiver out of Stanford. Zach Durfree, the edge out of Washington. And Parker Hughes, the linebacker out of Middle Tennessee State, rounds out this draft class. All right, let's get into what Mel Kiper had to say and just kind of my overall reactions. I'm going to start with some of the positive things that Mel Kiper had to say and then get into more of the negative. We'll start with Emmanuel Pregnon. Honestly, the Emmanuel Pregnon pick kept this grade from dipping even lower. Pregnon was a fantastic pick. He started for 3 different schools and saw time at both guard positions, and he's a really good run blocker. At 6'4", 314 pounds, he can control defenders and move them out of the way, and then he gets to the second level to spring big plays. I had him as a borderline first rounder, at worst, second rounder. So I'd characterize this as a pretty massive steal late in the third round. Mel, completely agree with you. This was my favorite pick out of the entire Jacksonville Jaguars 2026 draft class. I'm not sure if he's going to start right away. You still have Ezra Cleveland. You still have, obviously, Patrick McCarry starting at your 2 guard spots. But Pregnon is somebody 2027 and beyond. He 100% could be a factor in the Jaguars offensive line group. And you look at the PFF grades on your screen. I mean, I get PFF's not everything, but when you have 88s across the board, pass blocking, run blocking, 0 sacks allowed, only 1 penalty, it's something's trending in the right direction here. And I do like Pregnon. I thought, to Mel's point, I had him similarly as like a guy that maybe could sneak in the back half of first round. But at worst, like, okay, he's still going to be probably drafted in the top 50 picks. No, he ends up going to the Jacksonville Jaguars at pick 88. And like I mentioned of this offensive line, you're really deep in terms of your interior. I mean, Ezra Cleveland, Robert Hainsey, Patrick McCarry, I do expect those guys to be the starters if I had to guess, unless Pregnon does have an amazing camp, which he's all very much capable of doing. But Ezra Cleveland, you can kind of move off him after this 2026 season. You did restructure Robert Hainsey and Patrick McCarry, so they're kind of in it at least, I'd say not even just for this season, but maybe even a season beyond. And Wyatt Milam, Jonah Monheim, I think are also some really good pieces. So the interior of this Jaguars offensive line group is really now set, and the future is really set as well. So I'm a fan of this pick. We're going to get into more of what Mel Kiper had to say around the Jacksonville Jaguars and my initial thoughts, but this show would not be possible if it wasn't for our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. Shout out to Prize Picks, man. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. The playoffs are here for basketball. Baseball is underway, and it's time to cash in with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 sports picks app and is the best place to win cash while watching sports. If you're a hoops guy, you go with points, rebounds, assists, blocks, or 3-pointers. If you're more of a seam head, you can choose hits, home runs, or strikeouts. Prize Picks is available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. For tonight's hoops action, I've got a little 3-player basketball lineup. Give me the more on Jason Tatum's 7 assists. I think he's going to be the main focus, obviously, for Philadelphia tonight. Looking at him to dish the rock. OG Anunoby, give me the more on his 6.5 rebounds. And Victor Wembanyama, more than 26.5 points. This is a $10 lineup to win $60 here with our friends at Prize Picks. New user offer. Download the Prize Picks app today with the link in the comments and the description, and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it is good to be right. All right, now we have to get into the negative here, which there's a lot of negative from Mel Kiper and a lot of draft analysts in general, and I'm going to give my kind of general thoughts on it here in just a moment, but let's see what Mel Kiper had to say. After the Jaguars' big move up to number 2 at this time last year to get Travis Hunter. Their first selection wasn't until number 56, late in the second round. Jacksonville also came into the draft with 11 picks, tied for the second most in the league. 4 of them were on day 2. There was a chance to make some key additions, but 3 of them seemed like obvious reaches, and very few roster needs were addressed. So, I'll say this about the Jaguars' kind of day 2 picks. Here they are on screen. If you look at them just from a consensus draft board perspective, and again, I'm guilty of this as well. I went a lot off of the consensus draft board because I didn't have the NFL intel that the Jaguars and other teams did. You'll look at this draft class and it's like, okay, if you would have told me this was the group beforehand without knowing anything, yeah, you could argue Nate Borgershire could have been a little bit of a reach. Albert Regis wasn't expected to go until round 4, round 5. Jalen Husky was more of a round 6 talent, the safety/defensive back out of Maryland. And then Pregnon obviously was the huge steal that the Jaguars got. However, I do think that Mel is just not taking into consideration the kind of thought process and just overall vision that the Jaguars had. Now, from a pure value standpoint, which is where Mel Kiper's kind of taking this from, he's not going to be a fan of this, nor should any really draft analyst who, again, a lot of these guys were graded out as day 3 prospects. Here's what Mel Kiper also had to say specifically about the day 2 picks. Nate Borgershire was number 127 on my final big board, but went in round 2. Last season was the first time he had more than 6 catches in a season, and he still had just 19. He is an inline blocker who can help spring some runs, but I would rather seen an actual running back here, or a linebacker, or a defensive tackle. The Jaguars did get that defensive tackle with the next pick, but Albert Regis was my defensive tackle 15 on my board. And with the last pick on day 2, Jacksonville went way off the board for Jalen Husky. I have concerns about his tackling ability, but that he will bring ball skills. The versatile defensive back had 11 interceptions over the past 3 seasons. I had him graded as a safety. All right, just addressing the elephant in the room. The Jags board was clearly different than the consensus big board, whether you were going off of Dane Brugler, whether you're going off of Mel Kiper, whether you're going off of CBS Sports, whatever the case may be, the Jags board, and not just the Jags board, but a lot of NFL teams' boards were different from the consensus. I'd say even more so than in previous years. I mean, there was just a run of blocking tight ends on day 2 that I have never quite seen in the National Football League. But we've always talked about it, right? The game is changing, adapt or evolve, and teams will look to try to, follow trends and also kind of build their teams to counteract what's going on in terms of, defenses and what they're doing, and then similarly for offenses and what they're doing. And I think the Jaguars were kind of smart in getting ahead of it with Nate Borgershire, right? Because you saw how many tight ends went after it, and they clearly liked him the best out of Texas A&M. Nor did he have the most production in college? No, but I still think he's a really good get. Albert Regis, again, they valued him. They like his motor. They think he could fit really well alongside Ruka Roro. I now more expect the Jaguars to kind of run it back at that defensive tackle room, which I didn't necessarily think they were going to do. And then Jalen Husky is a clear defensive back that, yeah, he wasn't graded the highest, but he had a lot of interceptions and a lot of different playmaking kind of production during his collegiate career. So what I'm here to say is this. The Jaguars, I was pretty lenient on them during their kind of whole draft process and my whole thoughts in terms of their ways of going about things. I'm going to give James Gladstone and Liam Cohen the benefit of the doubt. I think that they've earned that respect and they've earned that trust after year 1 leading the Jaguars to the success that they had. And now they're looking to build, holes in terms of, or building this roster in terms of plugging in holes that they would have sought throughout the, 25 season last year and said, okay, where do we need to get improved? Like, they're not going to always, look at some consensus board. They're going to say, how can we improve the Jaguars to the best of our ability in our minds? I'm going to trust them on it. I'm going to sit there and say, okay, you guys clearly have a vision. We'll see what it goes or how it will work and how it ultimately will fare, not only just for 2026, but years down the line. That being said, this draft class was huge for Gladstone, Cohen, and their futures. Because if it doesn't work out, we're going to see some heads turning and we're going to see some kind of look backs to this 2026 draft class being like, maybe you should have stayed at the consensus. But for now, I'm going to give Gladstone and Cohen the benefit of the doubt. We've got you guys covered with Jaguars coverage all year long. There's some people, hey, the draft's passed, the draft's gone, UDFAs and everything. We're out of here. We'll see you guys in August and September. Not us. We're here bringing you videos weekly coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars, May, June, July, all the way until we get football season back, which, God, I can't wait for football to be back. We've got you covered. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button here at Jags Now for the best Jaguars coverage here on YouTube. More from Mel Kiper Jr. here on the Jaguars, just overall draft strategy. I had linebackers as team's most pressing need after Devin Lloyd signed with the Panthers, but Parker Hughes was the only ad there down at number 240. Coach Liam Cohen could have used another running back beyond Bashal Tootin and Chris Rodriguez Jr. too. It stinks to lose Travis Etienne Jr. in free agency, or Travis Etienne Jr., in free agency, but there weren't any moves there. So just to kind of go back a little bit, yes, the linebacker position was something that I really wanted the Jaguars to address in free agency. And they didn't necessarily do that after they lost Devin Lloyd. I said, okay, maybe they'll go after a linebacker in the draft. Didn't really necessarily happen, like it said, until the 7th round. Well, you'd still have some investments that you've made in previous seasons at the linebacker position after Devin Lloyd left. You have Ventrell Miller and Jack Kaiser, both 4th-round picks in their respective draft classes in 23 and 25. And if you look at this linebacker room, Dennis Gardeck's more of your kind of linebacker that you want him going forward. He's better in the run defense game. Can give you some pass rush upside, but he's not somebody you want backpedaling in coverage. So you're really relying on Foye Oluokun, who's not getting any younger. And I guess the winner of Ventrell Miller and Jack Kaiser during this kind of, training camp battle that they will have, and I'm going to give the slight edge to Ventrell Miller because he's been on the roster longer, but don't sleep on Jack Kaiser, who was one of Liam Cohen's first draft picks in terms of obviously being drafted last year. So I'm looking at this room, and you go from a guy in Devin Lloyd, who I don't necessarily blame the Jags for paying or not paying, the money that he got in free agency, but not as simply addressing that position and not really kind of having an answer in terms of like, oh, we'll just promote our guys and draft and develop the guys we've already drafted. To me, it leaves me a little I'm not really sure, because the heart and soul of any NFL defense nowadays is that linebacker position. We talk about all the time the Jaguars being able to improve that front four, which I do think they did during the NFL draft. Their secondary was already in a really good spot. We'll see what Travis Hunter is able to do now in a more cornerback full-time role. Linebacker was really a key part of the Jaguars defense last year in terms of them helping them be as great as they were. And to me, it feels like they got worse and they're just kind of relying on some of the younger guys to step up. We'll see where the Jaguars' floor and ceiling for that linebacker room is. In terms of the running back room, we've talked about it in the past. Bashal Tootin is expected to be the Jaguars' kind of RB1 going into next season. Chris Rodriguez is brought in to be kind of more of a complement, more of a thumper. And look, combined last year, this Jaguars running back trio that's currently on the roster, and now that we're past the 2026 NFL draft, this is who your kind of top 3 is. To me, less or just a little over 900 yards of production. The Jaguars were clearly content with their running back room. And they were clearly content with saying, okay, we have a Bashal Tootin who showed signs of promise last year. We want to see him in an increased role. We bring in Chris Rodriguez, whose familiarity during his time at Kentucky with Liam Cohen's system. And LaQuinn Allen can give us some solid, RB3 reps, snaps, maybe however many snaps a game. So I'm interested to see. They clearly went budget with the running back room, which I don't necessarily hate, and I have more confidence in because you had a plan, you had a vision with it. Linebacker, though, that's a legitimate concern in my opinion, I should say. But I want to hear from you guys. Let me know. Which position are you most concerned about on this Jaguars roster? For me, it's linebacker, and it's really not even close. I do think that the Jaguars will look to see how both Kaiser and Miller look during training camp and leading up to the season to see if they maybe try to get aggressive. You never know with James Gladstone. But for now, that is my biggest position of concern. You guys let me know down below in the comments section. And thank you guys so much again for tuning in to this episode of Jags Now, presented by Chat Sports. We will be back with some more coverage around the Jacksonville Jaguars here tomorrow, so make sure you subscribe to never miss a beat here on the channel, and we'll see you all next time.